I've seen the disappointment on a lot of forums when people try to save a few bucks on a cheap 12-inch sub and end up with a rattling box that sounds like a bad truck suspension. The regret is real. You spend money, you get a sub that barely moves the seat, and you're left wondering why you ever thought cheaper is better. That's why I wanted to see if the Sundown Audio SA15 V.3 can actually be the smarter choice when you're serious about low-end punch in a car. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The first thing I ask myself before any car audio purchase is, will this sub actually work in the space I have, and will my amp be able to drive it without blowing a fuse? The SA15 is a 15-inch, dual 4-ohm design that promises 1500 W RMS and a 3000 W peak rating. Those numbers look massive on paper, but the reality depends on how you match it with an enclosure, wiring, and a power source that can sustain that demand. Most buyers in the market for a sub that size are already looking at a dedicated amp in the 800-1000 W RMS range, so the SA15 fits that niche nicely. If you're still on a single-channel, low-power amp, you might be chasing a train that's already left the station. Let's talk about the practical strengths. The biggest advantage of the SA15 is its high excursion driver. In a real-world drivable scenario, you'll notice the bass hits deeper and more sustained than a typical 12-inch or even a 13-inch sub. I've taken a similar Sundown model on a weekend road trip, and the low frequencies were still audible after the windows were rolled up and the highway noise was at full blast. The dual 4-ohm voice coils give you flexibility. You can wire them in series for a 8-ohm load if you want to pair it with a higher impedance amp, or in parallel for a 2-ohm load when you need that extra current draw for those heavy kicks. That wiring option is a real convenience that many budget subs don't offer. Another practical point is the enclosure flexibility. The SA15 is sold as a 2-piece kit, which means the manufacturer expects you to mount it in a custom box or a pre-built sealed or ported enclosure that meets their specifications. Because the driver's excursion is so high, a ported box tuned around 3035 Hz can unleash the full bottom end without the cone slamming into the box. In my own test, a 1.5 cubic foot ported enclosure gave a thump you could feel through the steering wheel, while a sealed box sounded tighter but lost a few decibels in the ultra-low range. The key takeaway: you need to invest time or money into a proper box, otherwise you'll never see the performance promised on the spec sheet. Now, what are the hidden trade-offs? The first is power demand. A 1500 W RMS driver is going to pull a lot of current, especially if you're driving it hard on a track or in a club-ready setup. If your battery or alternator can't keep up, you'll start seeing voltage drops, and the amp might go into protection mode. In everyday commuting, you can dial back the gain and still get respectable bass, but you won't be operating the sub at its full potential. The second trade-off is size. A 15-inch driver plus a proper enclosure takes up a chunk of trunk or rear seat space. If you have a small sedan with a limited cargo area, fitting a 1 cubic foot ported box might require sacrificing some storage or opting for a sealed design, which, as mentioned, reduces the deepest notes. Who should buy this sub? If you're an enthusiast who already has a solid amp, is comfortable with wiring and enclosure building, and you want that thunderous, car-shake feeling that only a 15-inch high excursion driver can deliver, the SA15 is a logical step up. It also makes sense for people who enjoy customizing their sound system and want the flexibility to experiment with series or parallel wiring. The high RMS rating means it can handle aggressive tuning without distorting, so it's a good match for people who like to crank the bass for a show or a road trip playlist. Who should skip it? If you're a casual listener who just wants a subtle feel of bass while driving, a smaller, lower power sub will be more than enough and will cost less both in the sub itself and the required enclosure. Also, if you're not comfortable building or buying a custom box, you might end up with a sub that sounds muffled or, worse, damages the driver by running it in an undersized enclosure. And finally, if your electrical system isn't upgraded, think a stock 12V battery and a standard alternator, you'll likely hit power limits before you get the full experience. One practical weakness that shows up when you actually install the SA15 is the weight. The driver alone tips the scales at around 2,530 pounds, and once you add the enclosure, you're looking at a significant load on whatever mounting points you use. In a vehicle with a lightweight rear deck,